Hey friends, it's Gloria and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up, talking about all of the reading that I got to do in the month of June. I read a lot of nonfiction this month and some out-of-the-box reads for me. I also went on a vacation to Hawaii and did some reading there. So I'll cover all of the various books and their categories. I also DNF'd a ton. I had a lot of low-rated books. I have some unpopular opinions. It was a random month and I have 19 books to cover in total. I'll try to keep it quick and brief, but let's kick off with good old historical fiction. I picked up Hula by Jasmine Iolani Hawks. This was mentioned in my last video on my summer TBR. I got the advanced listening copy thanks to LibreFM and I saved it while I was in Hawaii because it felt like the perfect time to read it, and it was the perfect time to read it. And I think the only reason that I finished this book was because I was in Hawaii, and this book is a collective voice of Hawaiian history, the struggles of the Hawaiian people. Those are some of the positive takeaways, but overall I landed on 2 stars with this book. I was a little bored. I was struggling to finish it at the end. This was just a very disjointed story that gave me whiplash feels. Like I mentioned, there is a part of this collective voice, just like a general we. I think it's a Hawaii talking, and it tells its history, how the indigenous people were basically screwed over, tourism took over, it got colonized, all of these different aspects that really destroyed the island life and the community. And then paired alongside that, there is this mother-daughter family story, and it's this fraught relationship and kind of a coming-of-age story. The perspective shifted so much, gave me whiplash. Like I said, sometimes I didn't know who was talking or what was happening. It jumped in timeline as well, and so I feel like this had good bones, but the way the story unfolded just really didn't work for me and the way I like to take in a story. Let's keep the negative ball rolling. Again, most of this video will be a little bit sad, unfortunately, but the next historical fiction that I tried to read and didn't finish is The Davenports by Crystal Marcus. Now, this wasn't originally on my radar. This is a young adult historical romance. I saw this hyped and loved a lot by Denise from La Rosa Reed, so it made me want to try it, but I had a really hard time connecting with the characters. This is also a multiple perspective. I believe there's 4 women, and this is set in the early 1900s in Chicago, and it follows a wealthy Black family that really was one of a kind during that time period, and that's what initially intrigued me. I would have loved to be pulled in, but unfortunately this really lacked historical context for me, and when I'm not pulled into the setting and the time period in a historical fiction, then I'm just not interested. And then on top of that, the characters were so annoying to me. They were all way too similar. They were all these Black girls, because this is more YA, from different walks of life, but they all had very similar personalities and perspectives. They were basically going against the status quo or having an internal dialogue of, I don't want to be like what the expectation of me is, and I also am supposed to be with this guy, but I really have a crush and want to be with this guy instead, which is someone I'm not supposed to be with. And even within just the first few chapters, I was already like, what? All of you guys are gonna have the same storyline? Again, great premise, but it didn't hook me from the beginning, so I couldn't continue. A few more meh, middle of the road historical fictions. I'll mention Mrs. Porter Calling. This is book 3 in the Emmeline Lake Chronicles, the first book being Dear Mrs. Bird, which is one of my all-time favorite historical fictions. I absolutely loved that book when I read it a couple years ago. It's a series. I read the second book. I thought it was pretty good, that one being Yours Cheerfully, and then this is the 3rd installment. It still follows the same main character and then some other side characters that have been introduced before. This was a NetGalley read for me, so I read the advanced reader copy. This book is set to be published on August 8th, and overall it wasn't bad. I gave this book 3 stars. It was an enjoyable read for the most part. However, the majority of the story is set in this workplace environment. The main villain of the book gave so much Umbridge feels from Harry Potter, like this sweet, perfect lady who's deep down really evil and annoying to read and just is causing havoc, and it was so annoying that it just kind of drove me nuts, and that really was the meat of the story. There was this tragic moment around the 70% mark that made me enjoy the book a little bit more because it brought out some complex emotions and processing of feelings that I thought brought a lot to the story. But at the end of the day, is this really necessary to be a series? I don't think so. I kind of wish Dear Mrs. Bird was just a standalone novel. I will be keeping my eye out, of course, for more of what AJ Pierce writes, because I did love her first book and I think there's potential. The next one, I don't know if you'd consider historical fiction, but I'm going to put it here because it is primarily set in like 2008 2009, but the book here is Women Talking by Miriam Toews. This one came on my radar because of course the movie release this year, and the trailer sounded really intriguing. I have since watched the movie, actually watched it on my plane ride home from Hawaii because it was on Alaska Air in-flight entertainment, and there was some great acting in that movie, but it really didn't deviate from the book, which also unfortunately didn't really work for me. This was like a 2.5 3-star read. It was very interesting. It was a very unique read, and I think it could totally work for some people. I had not heard of this historical moment, but this is based on a real life story of a very religious zealot, almost like cult-like Mennonite community in Bolivia who live in like this colony, and pretty much every single woman in this colony was drugged and raped over and over and over again for years by the men and elders of the community. They would be drugged at night, raped, and then they'd wake up not knowing what happened to them. They tried to bring it up. They were gaslighted and were like, no, you guys are just being haunted, or it's your imagination, or you guys are all crazy. Then one woman stayed up all night and caught someone, and then these men were taken to prison, and then the men were being bailed out and brought back to the community. So all the men are currently gone as this book is taking place. None of that is in the book. This was all an author's note of, hey, this event happened, and this is my perspective on a conversation I think would be happening with these women. So all of that tragedy isn't even part of the story. There is no action or really plot to this. This whole book is women talking. It is the group of women that are sitting in a barn in a hayloft, and they are discussing, do we stay behind? Do we forgive these men? Do we try to move forward and live? Do we follow like the commands of God, etc.? What do we do? And there's another group of women that are like, no, we have to leave and flee. We can't live with these men anymore. Some are very aggressive and like, no, we're gonna stay and fight, and I'm gonna like kill the men that raped my daughter. Just all of these varying perspectives and real feelings that maybe one would experience in that kind of setting. And there were a lot of interesting things brought up. This whole book is from the perspective of one young man who is the school teacher, and he is taking the minutes of this meeting. He's writing down all of the notes and the whole conversation that's happening between all of these different women characters, and that's kind of it. It was a bit of an underwhelming ending. Overall, not a terrible read. It brought up some interesting points. It made me think about and analyze some things differently, but it was such a plotless, meandering, just pure dialogue read through and through, and a very character, almost philosophical kind of read. And it was interesting overall, but definitely wouldn't work for everyone. Let me transition to some miscellaneous reads. I read one picture book in June, The Treehouse by Marjorie Tolman and Ronald Tolman. I picked up a picture book last month by this illustrator and then saw this one at the library, and this is a completely wordless picture book, and it was also fine, middle of the road. The illustrations were interesting, but also very clunky and like whimsical and random, really plotless kind of story, just animals interacting with one another. It was a bit of a random selection. Next, I'll touch on a couple contemporary reads, the first one being The Lonely Hearts Book Club by Lucy Gilmore. This is a 2023 new release set in a library, a book about books. This was also available to me as an advanced listening copy on Libro.fm, and I got a little bit in and I really wasn't pulled in. I don't love contemporary books about this grumpy old man who hates his life and then a young female that's like, hey, I'm gonna help him out and try to make him better. I just don't think those kinds of stories are for me. The dialogue in here was just so like cliche and awkward to me, and it just felt like a very cheesy, sort of poorly written dialogue sitcom feel, and I just really wasn't vibing with it, so decided it wasn't for me and I did not finish it. A contemporary romance that I picked up in June, also set in Hawaii, in Maui specifically, which is where I was, so it felt very fitting for this month, was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. Like I've mentioned in my previous wrap-ups, I'm dabbling in the romance genre, picking up books here and there and trying different authors out, and just like most of the romance books that I read, this falls right in the middle for me. 3-star read. I didn't love it. I don't know if I would try another Christina Lauren. Maybe. Parts of it were fun and a little escape. I liked the setting of Maui, but at the end of the day, also pretty forgettable. This is your classic fake dating trope or fake marriage. Basically, the maid of honor and the best man have to go on a honeymoon together, even though they are arch enemies and hate each other, because everyone at the wedding, including the bride and groom, got food poisoning, but they don't want to lose this beautiful vacation deal that they had. So they decide, hey, we're gonna go on this honeymoon and we have to pretend to be married there. And then of course they end up becoming friends and having good conversation and falling in love and hooking up, and then they have to come home and the Cinderella spell breaks and there's drama that unfolds and conflict, but then in the end it's all tied back up. So wasn't bad, and actually out of the bunch of the romance I've read, this one is towards the top, but also had some eye-rolling, cheesy, really kind of moments in it as well. Next, I'll mention 2 thrillers. The first one being The Bear by Claire Cameron. This is a short little read. I saw this recommended somewhere on some website, and the premise sounded amazing. It's another one of those things that just sounded so good that I had to pick it up, but it was so poorly done that I had to stop reading it because I hated it. This is based on a true story about a real couple that went on a camping trip in Canada, and then their bodies were found devoured by a bear. The author was inspired by that news event, but decided to write this story as if the couple had a pair of kids that were also there during this camping trip that maybe survived and outlived their parents, or had to watch their parents die and then survive in the woods afterwards. Again, an interesting survival kind of thriller, which is what I prefer to read over domestic or psychological ones, but I cringe at the child voice narrative. This was the perspective of like a 5-year-old girl. It just is so poorly done that I can't handle it. It was like nails on a chalkboard listening to this audiobook. The only time that I've read a book that I've enjoyed from a child's perspective, like a first person, this is happening to me, is Room by Emma Donoghue. I think that one was really well done, specific for an adult audience. This one just didn't work for me. I wish the author didn't include the children and just made it about the couple, maybe made one of them survive. I feel like that would have been an interesting take. But yeah, the child narrator, I just can't do it. A survival thriller that did work for me is Drowning by TJ Newman. This book is getting a lot of love and buzz right now, and I think for good measure. TJ Newman is an incredible author for these high stakes, heart-pounding action thrillers. I read Falling last year by her, which is a take on a hijacked plane, and that was an incredible thriller experience. It made it to the top of my reads in 2022. And this one was also really well done. I actually listened to this book right before my plane flight to Hawaii, and this is about a plane crash of people leaving Hawaii. It lands in the ocean. It did make me think about the plane differently when I stepped into the plane to go to Hawaii. I just paid attention to my exits a little bit more carefully than I usually would, I guess. But this one was a really good thriller, very action-packed. It was also heart-warming because you get attached to certain characters. It made me visualize and play everything out in my mind in a way that I would think this would be a fantastic movie, because I could see it and picture it based on how well it was all written. So overall, TJ Newman does it again. I will definitely be keeping an eye out for future books that she writes, because she writes them really well. And lastly, in this miscellaneous category before we end with nonfiction, I have a fantasy romance to talk to you about, and that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. A book never in a million years that I would pick up and read. I don't really read fantasy. I don't really read fantasy romance. I don't read YA stuff, although this is technically adult, but it's basically YA. I don't really read like the hyped fantasy books, but for whatever reason, I was so easily influenced by all of the chatter around it. And then I checked my library and it was available, and I was like, what? It's available? But so many people want to read this. How are there no holds on it? So I got the audiobook. And this was a really like another hate read kind of experience, like Happy Place by Emily Henry was last month for me. Yes, it was entertaining, but it was like trash entertainment. It was like watching a car crash. It was just horrible. And I know that that's probably more the unpopular opinion. I know a lot of people love it. I know several people also think it's trash, so I'm not the only one out there, but I would never recommend this book. I don't read a lot of fantasy, so I have like no stakes in the game here. I feel like I have no authority to even speak to the genre, but I'm like, there is so much better fantasy than this, and better romance, and better YA, and better dystopian, and just better everything than this book. I don't understand why it's being so praised and loved. But I also have never read like Sarah J Maas, and I don't know if it's that comparable. If people really love that author and those kind of books and they like this, is from my understanding. I don't know. I feel like I stepped into a world that I didn't realize existed. But people saying this is the new Hunger Games Divergent. It was trash, guys. Pure garbage. Mostly gratuitous amount of swearing. The dialogue is horrendous. The sexual content is the most sexual content I've ever read in a book, you know, and I've read Outlander and it's like times a million than that. The world building I feel like lacked a bit, you know. It was there, but it also wasn't fully explained. Like, why is everyone at war? Why do all these people hate each other? What is the history? And I know this is going to be a bigger series, so there will probably be more answers, but I feel like for a first book and for how long it was, there was just not enough, and it was just purely on these characters lusting after each other like no one's business. And I was like, my goodness. The dialogue was so cringy. Like, the way they talk to each other was so bad. I recently reread The Hunger Games, and that dialogue and inner turmoil of a character who has to kill people was so believable and real, and like the PTSD from that with Katniss was so amazingly well done that I don't understand how people are comparing that to these characters who also have to murder each other, but there's like no processing of what you're doing. They're just like all angsty and hate each other and just want to kill and want to fly dragons and want to have sex, and I'm just like, yeah, it was bad. It was so bad. I don't get it. I don't understand the hype, you know? I guess it just works for some people, but it didn't work for me. I'm definitely not on the bandwagon. I know there's a lot better fantasy out there to try, and probably even better fantasy romance for that matter, but yeah, it wasn't good. Alrighty, let's end with nonfiction. I have some poetry here. The first one being Felicity by Mary Oliver. This was on my spring TBR. This was also on my 23 books to get to in 2023, really an author I wanted to try. I dabble in poetry here and there. I definitely prefer positive poetry over like sad, gloomy, dark stuff. And I would say this collection definitely had some positive poetry, some nature poetry. Overall, I enjoyed it. It was like a 3.5 for me. I definitely want to try more Mary Oliver. I feel like I also needed to take my time a little bit. I think I rushed through this one, so I think I would have enjoyed it even more if I just spent my time kind of breaking down each line and just thinking on it a bit more. But I understand the hype of Mary Oliver, and I'm excited to try more of her work. Then I picked up A World of Wonders by Amy Nezhukumatathil. Definitely butchered that. But I picked this book up solely because of this gorgeous cover. It was also on my summer TBR. This one I just saw in my library and I was like, I need to check that out. And overall, there were some beautiful moments in the book. But this was a 3-star read for me. It was a collection of essays, which isn't usually my cup of tea. From this book, you would think this is solely a book on nature and these random animals or plants, but this was also a lot more personal to the author, and she interweaves personal stories of her coming of age, her time as a mother, her time as a daughter, and the way she felt being a mixed race kid growing up in America, and how she felt being brown and not seen as everyone else, and how she connected to her parents and at times disconnected from her parents, and how she connected to the natural world and found a love of writing. Parts of those stories and her being personal I enjoyed. Parts felt really random and unnecessary. Like really you're comparing yourself or trying to connect to like this random frog, and you're trying to piece it together with this random story from your childhood. Some of those moments when they did connect felt really beautiful, and I got it and I really liked it, and some were like, nah, that was fine. But there are some random fun facts about random animals and plants around the world too. So overall enjoyable, but I didn't love it like I thought I would. I also picked up How to Be a Moonflower by Katie Daisy. This is a beautiful book, especially for summertime. This is an ode to summer nights, and the author is an illustrator first and foremost. So this book is perfect. It is like a gorgeous coffee table book, illustrated book that's just full of beauty. But in this book, she mainly wants to inspire the reader and peruser to go outside on a summer evening and take in the nightlife, take in the sounds and the plants and the stars and the moon and everything that we take for granted in the evenings. And it really just made me appreciate summer evenings and summer nighttime, and inspired me just to be a bit more present, especially during this summer season that I'm in. Would recommend for those that love summer nights and beautiful artwork, and this would make a great gift. Next, I picked up a graphic novel, and that is Charlotte Bronte Before Jane Eyre by Glynis Fox. This one was also middle of the road, 3-star book for me. I did like learning a bit more about Charlotte Bronte and the Bronte family overall in this book. This is a nonfiction about these 3 sisters and what their lives were like and what happened to them before they became authors and while they were becoming authors. The whole book is just gray, black and white, which isn't my favorite for graphic novels. I really go to graphic novels for the visual excitement, and I love bright, beautifully illustrated, colorful graphic novels for the most part. This one had a lot of good information. I think for a nonfiction graphic novel, it was good. It was fine, middle of the road, but I didn't love it, and at times felt a little bit, you know, confused or lost, or didn't really care about the dialogue, was a little bit bored. Not always a good sign when you're bored in the middle of a graphic novel, because it's already a graphic novel. It's short. It should really be exciting and pull you in. And as far as nonfiction graphic novels goes, there are a lot better ones, but I appreciated the introduction to the history of the Bronte sisters. Next, I picked up But Have You Read the Book 52 Literary Gems That Inspired Our Favorite Films by Kristen Lopez. This one I just found at the library, picked it up because I love reading books and then watching the movie. And so this is exactly what it says it is. It goes through 52 movies that you were like, hey, did you know that this was based on this book? And there were some movies in here that I've watched and loved. There were a lot of older classics that I haven't, and I'm not like a big older movie kind of watcher, so I don't really care that much, but there were some interesting kind of just takeaways for those that love to geek out over movies, especially as a community who love to read books, and for those that also love to watch the movie as well and love older movies. You would really enjoy this book. I thought it was good, fine, middle of the road, 3 stars, as a lot of my reads were this month. Next, I picked up Laundry Love, Finding Joy in a Common Chore by Patrick Richardson. This was a nonfiction that's been on my radar for a while. I actually really enjoy doing laundry opposed to dishes, which are my enemy. I hate doing dishes with all of my life. Anyways, this book always intrigued me. I'm glad I picked it up. It is a teeny short little book, and there are parts in here that I found very useful, some takeaways that I'll be thinking about and trying to incorporate in my laundry routine. And then there was also just some stuff that's like, okay, was fine. So I gave this book like 3.5 stars. Ultimately, the author is like, hey, this is how you take care of clothes and how you do it well, and you've been basically doing it wrong your whole life. You don't really need to use harsh chemicals or bleach or strong detergents. You can get away with just using a few basic products and they're going to clean your clothes way better, and you just need some basic tools. And so that really helped inspire me in a lot of ways, because I don't love using harsh chemicals and detergents and that kind of thing. So there were some takeaways that I really enjoyed from this book. Another book that was on my TBR for so long, I'm glad I finally got to it. That is The Sound of Gravel by Ruth Werner. This book is compared and often said, for those that love Educated by Tara Westover, you'll also love Sound of Gravel. And I can see the similarities, this really tragic, harsh upbringing, and this girl writing about what she lived through, which was so much trauma, so much heartache and grief. This book is so heavy and so sad and beautiful at the end of the day that she was able to come out of this and write her story. But this is a very heavy book with just horrible things in here. Every trigger warning you can think of. There's death and child abuse and sexual abuse and religious bigotry, but it is a really good memoir, a very strong one. Nearing the end here, another nonfiction that I finished in June was Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. This is on the must-read list for those who are pregnant, and I'm glad that I picked it up. This one had a lot of interesting information in here. Very natural, holistic, you know, crunchy granola kind of stuff in here. Some stuff's very wild and different, would not even think about, and some stuff was also very helpful and useful to process as well. So one of those books that I'm glad I read on this pregnancy, parenting, birthing journey that I'm on. And finally, my cookbook for the month, because I go through one every month as part of a cookbook book club, was Half Baked Harvest Every Day by Tegan Gerard. So June was my month to pick a book, and this was the one I chose. I follow this cookbook writer and blog writer, Foodie Girl, on Instagram, and I'm always loving her posts. They're so scrumptious and yummy looking that I was like, I want to try a lot of her recipes. It was a really fun night. A lot of the ladies really liked what they made, and there was a lot of delicious food. I made a salad. The salad was fine, but there were some delicious soups and desserts that were just wonderful. It's definitely one that I would buy and consider having as well and trying even more from. So that was a success in my mind. Those are all of the books that I read or DNF'd or hated or loved. Very few that I loved. Mostly all were middle of the road in the month of June. It was a bit of a whatever month. I am still on the hunt for 5-star reads, man. They have been far and few between this year, and I really want that to change in the latter half, but we'll see. So anyways, thanks for spending some time with me today and watching. Please let me know what you think of any of my books here that I mentioned, or my thoughts and opinions. Those are always welcome. And yeah, thanks for watching today. I will see you guys in another video soon. Bye.